Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I'm talking to Stuart Trood. Hello, Stuart.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Now, Stuart, you're an unusual creature that fascinates me. You're a portfolio CFO. Can you tell me what one of those is?
Yes, absolutely. So a portfolio CFO for me is someone who has a range of different clients and therefore essentially a portfolio of activities and clients that they manage and very much they manage that portfolio based on their lifestyle, on their needs, and on what the ultimate aspirations that they want to achieve from their professional activities. I was obviously a CFO and a CEO for a considerable number of years, working across a range of different businesses, from large corporates through to startups. And one of the things that I wanted to do in my portfolio career is almost like take all of that experience that I'd brought together and help a range of different smaller businesses with their finance activities and their strategic activities, which is where I kind of get involved as a portfolio CFO.
So, as a portfolio CFO then, Stuart, how many clients do you have at any time?
Well, now I'm literally down to two or three, but you can. I think it depends on how many you feel in your own mind you can juggle. And in the role of a portfolio CFO, every portfolio CFO will have different objectives and aspirations. And as I said a moment ago, for me, it was very much about how they kind of interact with my personal circumstances and how much I want to work and where I want to work, and it's more about choice. Whereas obviously when you're in a corporate role or in a full-time CFO role, that's very much governed by the organisation that you're working for.
So this sounds as though it's a crafty plan to get to all the Aston Villa away games in Europe.
If only we were in Europe, that would be a wonderful thing. Yes, but absolutely, yeah, no. So but you're right. I mean, all joking aside, what it does is it allows you to, as I said, to balance your sort of your own activities. I've been in sort of business for over 30 years, and the portfolio CFO, which essentially for me came out and about after I kind of was involved in the sale of a business as a CEO. I decided that actually I didn't want to continue down the corporate route anymore, and I wanted to do something that's completely different, but for me it would be very interesting. And the businesses that I work for and work with are very much of real interest to me, both from a kind of business activity perspective, but also the people that I work with. So for me, everything I do is my choice, and I enjoy everything that I do.
So, in terms of the working week, and the corporate life is very much Monday to Friday, the standard 40-hour week, and probably being a CFO a lot more than 40 hours besides. How does that working week pan out then in your world of being a portfolio CFO?
It's a great question, actually, and one of the challenges of a portfolio CFO, and I've not been doing the portfolio CFO role that long, but and obviously the last 6 to 7 months has been during sort of COVID-19 and all the other wonderful things that brings. But one of the challenges is making sure that you balance what you really want to do and how you want to work with the demands that come to you. And I'm sure we'll get on to talk about, marketing yourself as a portfolio CFO, networking, etc. The challenge is that you become so involved in some of those businesses that you essentially run out of time during your working week. So I don't think my working week is any less in terms of the number of hours than I was doing in some of my CFO roles previously. The difference is I'm choosing where I sort of place my cards and what I do and how involved I get in the businesses. For me personally, being a portfolio CFO is quite challenging in the sense that I love to be involved in the business. So I'm not just I never have been just a pure sort of traditional finance leader. I like to get involved in the business direction, the strategy, in the sense of one of my businesses, it was around sort of turning the business around and pointing it in the right direction. And you become very involved in all those businesses and almost personally and professionally vested.
So, Stuart, you touched on the marketing side of this. You're there in corporate. You've got a role with one organization that's taking up all your time. You suddenly decide you want to make that switch. Well, 4 or 5 clients isn't going to come along overnight.
Mm.
How do you actually go about switching from corporate to portfolio CFO?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I was quite fortunate in the sense that I moved from corporate into a CEO role for an art services business, which then allowed me some time to start developing my portfolio. So for me, I was quite fortunate, but I think it's about networking most definitely, and I think finance professionals are not the best at networking. So one of the reasons that I joined a sort of a networking portal like Grow CFO was to sort of talk to like-minded portfolio CFOs and other industry leaders, because I think it's about who you know rather than what you know in terms of becoming a portfolio CFO. Secondly, I think you have to be very patient and deliberate around your approach. So it's again, I was fortunate enough to not have to worry as much financially as some may. So my choices were based around what I wanted to do rather than the financial needs and demands of me and the family. So I could be a little bit more patient and a little bit more choosy. And I think also you have to be very dogmatic in the sense that if you want to become a portfolio CFO, you have to give it a go. I've got a number of people that I know who aspired to be a portfolio CFO, but in the end, they ended up going back into a full-time professional CFO role because they just couldn't get the traction. Look, it's an interesting point, because I think at the moment, particularly around COVID-19 and the sort of the world that we're living in at the moment, you could argue that becoming a portfolio CFO right now is a very even more challenging area. The flip of that argument may be that a number of organisations suddenly decide that they don't need a full-time finance leader, and therefore a portfolio CFO, or someone who's working on a kind of 1-2 day a week or a month basis, might be exactly the path they want to go down.
Or, I suppose, is the organisation that's suddenly realising, having gone through a lot of change and a lot of need to review the numbers very quickly, that they need a finance guy that they haven't had in the past, but can't afford to employ somebody full time.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a really good point. And I think when you talk about portfolio CFOs, you have to look at your experience and essentially your toolkit, because a number of areas that I think also a portfolio CFO can help on is areas of their expertise, which may well be a sort of defined project. So let's just say, for example, a transformation project, a restructuring project, a cost reduction project that person can lead, and it may have a defined period. And if you're comfortable enough to having to managing those portfolios that range from a sort of an ongoing portfolio activity to a project based, again, that's another different aspect that and an exciting thing for me that a portfolio CFO can offer. He doesn't have to be wedded to the traditional sort of finance responsibilities. He can come in, do a defined role with a defined outcome, and then move on. And actually that's really valuable for their kind of portfolio and for their experience.
And I suppose that's the big difference between a portfolio CFO spending part of his time with a client and the sole practitioner accountant who's come traditionally from the annual accounts and doing various bookkeeping services for businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you also noticed that there are a number of organizations that are starting up that are looking to sort of create sort of portfolio CFO practices, for want of a better word. So if you've got for example, a number of tech startups that don't know where to go to get that sort of finance expertise, you've got a couple of companies that I can think of that actually started to sort of sell those services in. So again, back to a marketing perspective, if you can wedge yourself to one or a number of those and almost be on their kind of roster of potential candidates, again, that's another way of trying to get portfolio CFO sort of career going.
Yeah, so you're personally not associated with any of those, Stuart, are you?
No, I'm not associated. I mean, as I said, I've been lucky enough to, my range of activities have come out of my networking and my kind of contacts. So, again, people know, oh, I know Stuart, he's got some good experience. But again, to the point I said earlier, Kevin, that, if someone said to me, I know a guy who can do, who's transformed the business in this particular way, who's offshored, finance activities, I can bring them in for a period of time. And, particularly in this day and age when all businesses are looking at ways of being much more operationally efficient, then people with that experience you can jettison in and out are the way to go. It's almost like a consultative approach, I guess.
Mm.
You could look at it. So a portfolio CFO could be a consultant of some description.
And as a consultant myself, I rather like that idea. I like the idea of being involved in the finance transformation type of project. And
Mm.
what would worry me about taking on the title of portfolio CFO would be getting dragged into the day-to-day bookkeeping and management accounts producing of the organization. And do you find that you have to be involved in that to a great extent, Stuart?
One of the organisations I do actually, yeah. I mean, I actually enjoy it because having having gone sort of through my career and obviously got to a place where you're at the top and you're a leader of leaders within the business community and the finance community, you're never really getting involved in terms of finance processing and bookkeeping and stuff. So, but for those smaller organisations where they need an all singing, all dancing sort of finance help, then you may well get involved. And again, it's about choice. But for me, I find it quite refreshing and quite liberating to know that you can get yourself around zero, and you can. I mean, during this, for example, during this sort of last 6 to 7 month period, I've been involved in applying for C-bills, for loans. I've done the furloughing scheme, all those good things that again have been an invaluable experience, even with someone that's been in the profession for as long as I have.
And that's very true. And I can reflect on very similar experience over the last few months myself. While being a consultant, I'm also the guy who does all the finances for daughter's company, the treasurer of the not-for-profit sports centre in the village. So, and as well as my own company, that's 3 sets of zero books that I keep. So, yeah, I actually quite enjoy, Stuart, finding out the ins and outs of how zero works, of how it integrates to other systems and so on. Some of the stuff that we talk about in Grow CFO and those Tuesday Future of the Finance Function sessions, actually, because I'm doing that hands-on stuff in zero, they come to life quite well. Yeah. You mentioned Grow CFO as a support network, Stuart.
Mm-hmm.
What's that giving the portfolio CFO at the moment?
I think Grow CFO generally is giving an awful lot of different sort of finance aspects to a different range of finance professionals. For portfolio CFOs, I think, and the reason I kind of first came into contact with Dan Wells, the founder of Grow CFO, was that I wanted to find somewhere that essentially could peddle my wares in terms of networking, getting out there, understanding what like-minded portfolio CFOs do, how they go about their business. And one of the things that I do within Grow CFO, I mean, actually I'm the CFO for Grow CFO. So one of my portfolio activities is actually sort of part-time CFO for Grow CFO, if that all makes sense. But one of the things I also do is chair a sort of a regular Grow CFO portfolio CFO forum. So it allows those portfolio CFOs to interact on a regular basis via Zoom calls to talking about the things that are troubling portfolio CFOs, that are challenging them, that are giving them opportunities. And for me personally, I'd never found a network that could do that. Even when I was a CFO, most of the networking portals and institutes that I'd been part of before were very salesy. They were trying to sell their wares or someone else's wares on behalf. And Grow CFO is very agnostic. It's independent. And genuinely, the people that participate in Grow CFO are very much interested in developing themselves and improving their network and their collaboration, which doesn't come easy, I think, to finance professionals in the main. I'm not saying that's the same for everybody, but I think what Grow CFO allows is people to interact as much or as little as they want, and also take information from the various channels to use for their own personal and professional development.
I think that's very true, Stuart, that the average finance guy loves just hiding in the back office and crunching numbers and doesn't realize the importance of networking in the same way as a sales guy or a marketing guy does. So, I think that's will prove to be a very useful community. And what are the hot topics that are being discussed in there at the moment?
Well, I guess the last, as I keep referring to, the recent times that we've had and people exchanging kind of thoughts, ideas around what's happening in the world and how we can work through that are very much an ongoing set of topics, a range of different forums. I mean, the thing I like about Grow CFO is whether you're a portfolio CFO or you're a female leader or you're an aspiring CFO, there's something for everybody in there. A lot of the topics, so for example, if again, a good example for me is when I wanted to change my finance ERP many moons ago, it was really difficult to try and navigate through and find out the best solutions and what was right for my business at that particular point in time. Grow CFO doesn't have all the answers, but it has a community of people that have been through various similar experiences, and you can tap into that fairly easily. And it's got subject matter experts from a range of different disciplines, and that's really important, particularly in this environment when people are finding it quite difficult to get other things going.
So, Stuart, I run and have been running for quite a while another podcast called The Next 100 Days. One of the things that we typically ask guests on that program is, okay, if you want to do this, what are the key things you would do in the next 100 days? I think that's a very valid question for somebody sitting in corporate, thinking about becoming the portfolio CFO. What are the 3 or 4 things that you'd start doing in the next 100 days if that was you?
I think firstly, I want to make sure that I was absolutely certain that I wanted to become a portfolio CFO, and I think that goes without saying, but sometimes it can be a temptation. But firstly, I would talk to portfolio CFOs of varying lengths and varying disciplines, and get a real view. Be prepared to work out how you're going to, as you said earlier, Kevin, try to engage with your first client or a range of different clients, and work out a roadmap of the type of networking tools that you would need and the kind of areas that you are keen on supporting in terms of your portfolio CFO role. So as I said earlier, do you want to be a traditional bookkeeper or an accountant goes in 1 day a week to help a small, medium-sized business? Do you want to go in with your sort of project skills around various disciplines and help in that particular way? What are you prepared to do in terms of, to your point earlier, working week? Frankly, what can you afford to do? I mean, again, I think whilst as a CFO, you have this kind of view that as a your day rate for a CFO is significantly higher than it may well be when you go into portfolio world. Remember that many businesses that portfolio CFOs support are financially hamstrung. Cash is really challenging for them anyway. So, you may have to be compromising in terms of the type of services, in terms of charges that you put. So be very clear in your own mind about what you can and what you can't do, and work all those through. And if you start talking to people and networking, you'll start to understand that there are opportunities out there. And but of course, being really brutal, there are a number of people thinking exactly the same, particularly in this world where people are losing their roles and thinking about alternatives in life.
So, touch there on day rates and so on, Stuart. What's the typical range of day rates for a portfolio CFO? And if you're thinking about this, where would you be probably pitching yourself?
Oh, that's a tricky question to answer. I mean, the day rate. I mean, it all depends on what the businesses can afford to pay and be prepared to pay. I mean, you can go from anything from an hourly rate. I mean, I know some portfolio CFOs that actually charge on an hourly rate, and they charge on a timesheet basis. So I did 7 hours yesterday on £20 an hour or £50 an hour, whatever it might be. I mean, typically you'd be looking for sort of something like a day rate of around about £500, I think. But it could go upwards from that. And the other thing I think portfolio CFOs are, and something we haven't talked about, are very adept at is most portfolio CFOs have got a range of experience, good, bad, and indifferent, that they can impart and give back to other finance professionals. So one of the areas I think portfolio CFOs can really try and establish is the whole mentoring piece.
Yes.
And again, if you look at mentoring, I'm sure you and I have I've had coaches and mentors in the past where their rate is, £1,000, £1,500, £2,000, and a day sort of thing. So again, I think there's something there for CFOs to really kind of tap into from an experience perspective. They can give back, and that's something for me. Going back to why did I become a portfolio CFO, and what appealed to me about Grow CFO was that I wanted very clearly to give back to the finance community some of my insights and experiences, and the portfolio CFO role definitely allows me to do that into those troubled and challenged businesses, or those very exciting startup businesses. But it also allows me, I think, to go and impart my perspective, my soundings, my experience to people who are just newly qualified, aspiring CFOs, or new CFOs.
And I really do get that. And from a personal point of view, I'm much the same. Having spent the last 20 years as a management consultant, largely working on big projects pretty much full time, I want to step away from that kind of lifestyle. And one of the things I started doing prior to getting involved in Grow CFO was training in the classroom. And it was very much passing on that knowledge to the next generation of finance leaders. And I share your desire to do lots more of that. And that's one of the things behind getting involved in Grow CFO, developing the Learning Centre. And I think we can do some very exciting things in the future, mentoring the next generation of people.
Absolutely. And the one thing you realize when you become a portfolio CFO and you start talking to like-minded individuals, and then you start collaborating on a portal like Grow CFO, is the experience that you built up over the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, is you do kind of, it's put away somewhere, it's put away in that filing cabinet. And when you bring it back out, you realize how much experience that you actually have got, how many situations you've been through. I've talked a number of times in recent months about the financial crisis of 2008 and my experience there. And at the time, you were just going through it and navigating through to get to the other side. Now we're going through the whole COVID-19 crisis. There's an element of those sort of crisis management that's very applicable to this particular crisis. So those kind of experiences, again, to impart them, to share them with like-minded individuals or less experienced individuals, is really satisfying, and it gives me a real sense of, as I say, giving back to the finance community. I think the other thing for me, Kevin, is that the role of a CFO generally is changing so significantly. I think it started probably around about the time of the financial crisis, and it's sort of changing in front of our very eyes. And anything I can do to help along that sort of evolution or revolution, shall we say, I think is fascinating.
Yeah, I actually think COVID-19 has done a lot towards changing that role as well. And you tended to think in the past of strategy as being quite the domain of the CEO rather than the CFO. Now, suddenly from March onwards, we got thrown into that rethinking the business plan, rethinking the way we did business, and the numbers being very, very important behind that. And I think over that period, the CFO became probably much, much more involved in that strategic process than he's ever been in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you take that then onto the portfolio CFO, what that really does is for those businesses that are struggling with all those challenges and looking to redevelop its business strategy, or even to repoint itself in terms of it, an experienced CFO that can sort of jettison in for either a fixed period of time or on a part-time basis is invaluable for those sorts of organizations, because they can ill afford to have a full-time, fully fledged experienced CFO in the business. But what they can do is, via a portfolio CFO environment, is tap in. And the other good thing about someone like Grow CFO is if I don't know something myself around a particular topic, then I know very quickly I can find someone in the community that can sort of tap into that and help for a defined period. So again, it's that knowledge bank that you can rely on, and I think at this particular juncture, it's absolutely invaluable.
Stuart, you and I are both members of the Institute of Chartered Accountants.
No, that's incorrect. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, the best institute.
Different. That's different. Yes. I'll ask this question in a slightly different way then. As a chartered accountant, my institute have a thing called a practicing certificate, which they would require their members who are giving bookkeeping services and accounting services and so on to clients to hold.
Correct.
Is there any need for a practicing certificate to be a portfolio CFO?
There isn't anything formal. It's a very good question, actually. There isn't anything formal. And I don't even know whether there's just an acceptance that by a client that a portfolio CFO will be some kind of professional qualified accountant. But I think, so there isn't a formal qualification or a practicing certificate, as you call it. I think that there's just a recognition that if you're going down that route and you've got the range of experience and the history that you've got, that you will have, got some kind of certification or whatever, but it's not a prerequisite. No, not at all.
So, Stuart, that was a very exciting trip through the world of a portfolio CFO. If you've been interviewing yourself, is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't?
No, I think you've asked every question, Kevin. To be honest, I think for me, and I know I've said it before, the point that I really would like to say, if you're thinking about becoming a portfolio CFO, think it through. Don't get put off, and make sure it's for you, and talk to people. I'm more than happy to talk to anyone that's got a sort of a desire or thinking about it, but there's also some like-minded colleagues within Grow CFO that you can quite easily go in. Initial entry to the portal is free, so you can ask any questions around that to register. And I would sort of say to people, use that network that's available to really kind of inform you and make sure that your decision making is right and proper. And last thing for me is, and which is a bit bizarre me saying this, because I'm a very impatient person, but be patient, because it will form, it will develop. And I lost one of my assignments in the middle of this year. It was kind of coming to an end, and I thought, actually, what's going to happen with a couple of months to go? But with everything else that's been happening, it just gets replaced. And the final thing I would say from being a portfolio CFO, which you probably haven't asked me, is time management. Time management for a portfolio CFO is so important. It's almost it's so easy to be a victim of your own success and your own experience. So all of a sudden you've got 6, 7, 8, 10 things, 10 people asking you lots of different questions, and all of a sudden you're working 12-hour days and you're working the weekend. You've got to be very disciplined with your time management. You've got to really say, no, actually, I'm not the right person for this, or I can't do this at this moment in time. So that the clients that you are working with, you can actually give 110%, and you're seen as a key member of their team. And for me, as a portfolio CFO, the great thing is I can have a range of different activities and businesses that I work with. But for me, it's also important that I'm seen as a part of their leadership teams and part of their businesses, and long may that continue.
Yeah, I can really see that time management thing, Stuart, and certainly from the point of view of the guy who works on projects all the time, fine if you've got one project going, but the occasions when I've had 2 going, or maybe exceptionally 3, you find that all the deadlines on all the projects end up being at the same time, and you can go from having not very much to do to being swamped with probably 2 or 3 times more than you've got time to fit in. That time management thing, once you've got more than one client pulling in your time, is absolutely critical to get right.
Yeah, because if you're successful as a portfolio CFO with a client, there's more than a chance that they want more of your time, not less of it.
Yeah.
And the temptation and easy thing is suddenly for it to creep from being a portfolio of activities to being one full-time role. So that's where you have to have that discipline and that time management and that focus in your head that says, no, I wanted to be a portfolio CFO, and here's the reasons, and I need to revisit those reasons, because it's quite easy to just revert to type.
Yeah. So Stuart, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
If you're interested in becoming a portfolio CFO, or indeed if you're one already, one of the key things to do is come along and join the Grow CFO portal at growcfo.net. Go in and join the special interest group within there for portfolio CFOs. Make yourself known to Stuart and the rest of the members. And everything that we do for portfolio CFOs is completely in the free part of the portal. There's nothing in way of cost to becoming a member. Thank you again, Stuart.
Fabulous. Thanks, Kevin. Good luck to Newcastle for the new season.
And good luck to Aston Villa as well.